Senator from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to lay out exactly, in somewhat abbreviated terms, how exactly Joe Biden is responsible for the border crisis and what Americans would like to see. And he alone, right now, can solve this issue. I think there's been a lot of discussion about improving some of the laws that are currently on the books. I think the work that was done to try to do that, in my view, didn't accomplish that. But nevertheless, we are here on Super Bowl Sunday to consider something else. I don't mind working on Super Bowl Sunday. I grew up in a blue-collar family. I'm not, Missourians work hard. Working on a Sunday is no big deal. But you have to ask, what would keep us in today? What would Chuck Schumer push, which, by the way, was the worst. If he's a poker player, it was like the worst tell of all time. Everybody knew he was going to try to jam us right before a 2-week break. I've only been here a year, and I know that. It was coming. But what could be so important when we have a $34 trillion debt, a border that is wide open? It is what the center of gravity of this whole thing has been about the whole time, which is sending $61 billion to a foreign country. We should have a robust debate about that. We absolutely should. But we're lying to ourselves if we somehow believe that that's more important to Americans than securing our own border. It's not. You know it when you go home and you talk to people, what they're talking about. The polling certainly doesn't indicate that. But here we are. So it's fine. We're here. Let's have a debate. I'm going to reserve some comments for a later time on how we could actually have that debate in the United States Senate without another senator having the opportunity to offer an amendment. I've had so many conversations with Republicans and Democrats who believe that there are 99 other people here, or 98 other people here, or 96 other people here, depending on who's getting to draw up the four corners. And our willingness to sort of diminish the power of an individual senator that's sent here by an entire state is baffling. And I do think that this place is ripe for some sort of bipartisan reform on process. This pent-up energy that exists is partly to blame because there are no vehicles for people to actually offer amendments. You know, Senator Collins and Senator Murray have worked on the appropriations process. We've spent 8 hours and 14 months on that, on the floor. That's, I suppose, more on that to come. But it is Super Bowl Sunday. So I guess I will give a Super Bowl analogy or a football analogy about what has happened at our southern border. I wish I'd have been smart enough to think of having a John Madden board here with the offense and defensive lines lined up about what the play that Joe Biden drew up in early 2021, but it goes something like this. We had the best defense that football had seen in 45 years. The lowest level of illegal immigration in 45 years. So what defense does Joe Biden put on the field when he comes into office? He doesn't. He takes the defense off the field. 9 million illegal immigrants later, we're at where we're at. And we're having this discussion again about foreign aid when Joe Biden has failed to secure our own border. It's not by accident. This didn't just happen. From day one, whether it was just simply a reflexive desire to undo everything that was Trump, or a true open borders agenda written by a bunch of liberals on a white paper that somehow got into these positions of power, I think everyone can honestly agree that what's happening is not in the best interest of the Americans that we represent. So I suppose let's run through the anatomy of this border crisis and a kind of a tale of the tape. From day one, all of those effective policies that were working, by the way, under existing law. So we had that 45-year low under current law. There is no legal deficiency right now. There's no deficiency in the law that would prevent Joe Biden from securing the border today. There isn't. Objectively, there isn't. Are there improvements that could be made? Sure. We ought to debate that. But I guess what happened yesterday was if you somehow don't support what this was, you have forfeited, whatever the compromise was that was rejected, that as a senator, you don't have the right to offer an amendment to try to fix a bill? I think that's a dangerous road to go down. But here's a small sampling. On January 20th, 2021, Joe Biden terminated, on day one, terminated the national emergency at the southwestern border, halting the construction of the border wall. In fact, we found out in the Armed Services Committee that he was paying contractors $140,000 a day to not build the wall. And in one instance, with some materials that were put up for auction, over $4 million worth of materials were sold for just over $100,000. I mean, I think if people that we represent actually, if you talk to them and told them this, no one would agree that that makes any sense for taxpayers, regardless of what your position is. But because of this, again, this reflexive desire to undo everything that was Trump, taxpayers take a bath, our borders wide open. Same day, Joe Biden reverses a Trump-era executive order that and several proclamations that put restrictions on immigration from countries associated with terrorism. Same day, January 20th, 2021, Joe Biden announces a 100-day moratorium on deportations and immigration enforcement. Forever, among Republican and Democrat administrations, essentially our border policy, our immigration policy was, if you come here illegally, you're detained or deported. Unless there's some reason like you're claiming asylum, 9 out of 10 of them, roughly, are deemed bogus. But that had been the policy of the United States of America. No longer. Same day, January 20th, 2021, Joe Biden revoked a Trump-era executive order that directed the federal government to employ all lawful means to enforce the immigration laws of the United States. That was the Executive Order 1376-8. And that was just the first day. In February 2021, the Biden administration stopped applying Title 42 expulsions to children at the border. On February 17, 2021, the CDC exempted unaccompanied alien children from Title 42 expulsion requirements. March 10, 2021, the Biden administration announced the reinstatement of the Central American Minors Program and expanded it on June 15, 2021. In April, and again in October of 2021, DHS canceled contracts to build the border wall. I mentioned the $140,000 a day, which is, quite frankly, unbelievable. On October 29, 2021, the Biden administration cancels the Migrant Protection Protocols, or the Remain in Mexico program. When I was Attorney General, we were engaged in Missouri in a number of these related lawsuits, and these lawsuits related to these issues, and were successful for a while. Remain in Mexico was one of those. We got a temporary and then ultimately a preliminary injunction. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court kept it in place. We had to go back to the federal district court and say, Judge, the Supreme Court said this is still in effect. They're not listening. The Biden administration refuses to listen to the Supreme Court. Seeking contempt. It's not in their DNA. So we wonder why we're at. This is on purpose. And I think that in a sincere attempt from many of my colleagues, the purpose of what this was supposed to be about by some, my personal view is to keep all this stuff separate. I've tried to be consistent about that. But the idea was, obviously the Ukraine money is very, very important to a lot of people here. That maybe there would be some trigger. If numbers were actually at somewhere close to zero, the money would be released. That was never on the table, and I think that led to a lot of frustration by some. But again, for me, I've always maintained that Joe Biden has the authority right now. We don't need anything else. April 1st, 2022, the Biden administration announced that they intend to end Title 42 and stop expulsions under that program and stop the use of Title 42 ultimately in May of 2023. Title 42 was perhaps the most effective in sort of turning people away, and as far as the numbers go, but they were, very early on committed to undoing that. September 9th, 2022, the Biden administration reverses the Trump-era public charge rule. On December 13th, 2022, the Biden administration sued the state of Arizona to force them to remove the shipping containers that were placed to close the gaps in the border wall. January 6, 2023, the Biden administration began abusing statutory statutorily authorized parole authority. Again, border wall, remain in Mexico, parole authority. If you just did those two things and didn't, or three things, and you didn't actually reinstate all of the executive orders from President Trump, you could solve this by and large. These paroles are supposed to be that what the paroling authority is case by case. This is individualized adjudication. It is not because you're from a particular country or some category. Enforce current law. That's where the frustration lies. And so that included immigrants from Colombia, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Millions of people. January 3rd, 2024, the Biden administration sued the state of Texas for enforcing a recently enacted Texas state law that allowed Texas judges and magistrates to order illegal immigrants to return to the foreign nation from which they came, or from where they entered, I should say. That's what you need to know about this debate. Joe Biden literally in his administration was suing Texas for trying to enforce the laws they refused to enforce. And perhaps I would say, if you wanted to understand maybe and encapsulate the most ridiculous or outrageous effort to undo something that existed under President Trump, there was something called Operation Talon. Operation Talon was created to deport previously convicted sex offenders from other countries. Now, I understand we live in a divided age in partisan politics. I would think that we could all agree that we should deport previously convicted sex offenders seeking to come here illegally. That was off the table. That's too much. So we heard a lot about compassion and inhumanity. There is nothing compassionate about what's happening at the border right now. People are drowning. Fentanyl is streaming across. The human trafficking, the cartels, and my experience as AG of being down at the border, they have spheres of influence, not just at the border, but in the interior United States, to go to places like Atlanta and St. Louis, Kansas City, Denver. People who are essentially in indentured servitude, and if they speak up, bad things happen to folks back home. So this crisis is completely man-made, and that man is Joe Biden. And I know that, look, we put on jerseys a lot of times, but we're all Americans. And I just don't think anybody can look and see what's happening and think it's okay. It's not. I think we've gotten a little more clarity on that, a little more bipartisan voice on that. And my contention to this chamber is that there is one person, there is an administration who can fix it right now, but refuses to do so. Illegal border crossings, and I'll just sort of close with this. Recently, I think everybody's talked about it, just shocking numbers. An all-time high in December of 2023, 249,785. That's up 31% from November, the previous month, and up 13% from the previous December. Signals are being sent. And based on the polling, I don't know. If the concern is next year that there might be a change in administration, we better be ready for what that looks like. And again, the person who can do it, in regardless of what may have happened with this language, if you have an executive branch not interested in executing the law, you're never going to get around that. So we've got the crisis at the southern border. No new authority is needed. It's up to him. And I wish he would. As an American, I really wish he would. But there are forces evidently in the White House or on that side of the aisle that just, it's not doable. And so now I guess he's in a blame game, but nobody's buying it. They didn't buy the Bidenomics argument. They're not buying that this is anyone else's fault than the person that reversed everything that was working previously, and the person that can enforce the laws on the book right now and secure our border. He could do it. He just simply doesn't want to. Mr. President, I yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oregon.